What's going on, guys? It's your boy Nick coming at you with a brand new hand trap video to celebrate our 200th subscriber. Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. We have officially hit 200 subs on the channel, and I couldn't be happier to announce that. I started this channel not that long ago, and it was just something that I wanted to do as a side hobby just because Yu-Gi-Oh is something that I'm really passionate about. And never in my wildest dreams did I expect to reach this amount of subs on something that I just started doing on a whim. I try and put my heart and soul in all my content and put the most thought in my deck profiles and in my videos. And for those of you that have supported me from the start, I thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. I want to continue to grow as a channel and as a community. And to those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Nick. We upload deck profiles, deck discussion videos, live duel videos, and all topics related to Yu-Gi-Oh! So if that's something that you're interested in, then please go ahead and hit that subscribe button below and leave a like and comment on this awesome hand trap video we're about to dive into. But again, I just want to say thank you all so much from the bottom of my heart. I cannot believe that we hit 200 subs, man. Let's go. I'm so pumped right now. I have so much cool content in the works for the channel. I know that I do have a Lyralusk updated profile, post-ban list in the works. I also have an updated FA Metaphors profile in the works for post-ban list. I'm also going to be featuring a Melfi deck profile on the channel relatively soon. So I'm still doing testing on that. And I'm also going to be doing an updated Metaphys profile post-ban list as well. So stay tuned for all those projects in the works. But with that being said, we're going to dive into this hand trap video for our 200 subscriber special. Before we talk about our hand traps, though, we need to talk about the format, because hand traps and what hand traps are good are always contingent on what the format's like. And unfortunately, since Skill Drain has recently been unlimited to 3, Eldritch is one of the top tier decks, and as sad as it is to say, there aren't many hand traps that stop Eldritch from doing what they want to do. It's unfortunate, but it just is what it is. Also, for the purposes of this video, when I use the term hand trap, I'm specifically referring to cards that discard themselves or activate from hand during the opponent's turn to prevent them from performing some kind of action. So because of that, we're going to be excluding cards like Forbidden Droplet, Forbidden Chalice, Book of Moon, or other things of that nature. I'm specifically only looking for hand traps to be discussed during this video. But anyway, getting back into the format, we know that Eldritch is tier 1. We also know that Sword Soul is tier 1. We know that Floowandereeze is on the verge of being tier 1. Virtual World is still up there as well with all the different variants that people are testing with now. You have the Adventure Package being played in Virtual World. You have the Punk engine being ran as well. You also have Prank Kids that are still up there vying for meta contention. You have pretty much any Shaddoll invoked Dogmatica variant, all the triple hodgepodge. Usually anybody that's playing those kinds of decks are usually running 1 or 2 or all 3 of those archetypes in the same build. So that's still obviously, fighting for meta contention. I'm trying to think, what other decks am I forgetting? Sky Striker is another big one. You have a bunch of Striker players running around like it's Christmas because the Imperial Order got banned. So, there's a lot of diversity in the format, but at the same time, it's tough trying to pinpoint what hand traps to run to stop these decks specifically, because they're all so diverse and their play styles differ drastically from each other. Phantom Knight. Duh. Phantom Knight's another big one. That's also, tier 1 status pretty much. But again, that's just adding it to the list of decks that you need to learn how to side against and what hand traps are useful against. And sometimes it can be hard. And I know that, there's a huge influx of new Yu-Gi-Oh players because of Master Duel and, things like that and Duel Links and whatnot. But it could be a little overwhelming when you're trying to, go to locals and you're watching what everyone else is playing and you don't know what hand traps you should be running or if you should be running any at all. Just for side note or reference, I think no matter what kind of deck you build, and I guess take this as a deck building knowledge or constructive criticism, you want to run some type of hand trap in whatever deck you build. Even if it's just a playset of one particular hand trap, you want to have at least one hand trap in your main deck, no matter what deck you're building. So just always consider that if you're going to build a deck, you want to run some kind of hand trap, because being able to stop your opponent on their turn is crucial sometimes, especially if you lose the dice roll and you're going second. If you let them combo off, it's probably going to mean your demise. But with that being said, let's jump into these hand traps and talk about it. We're going to start off with Effect Veiler. I would say this is the tried and true, old reliable, also the most budget hand trap you could buy. There's nothing wrong with it. She discards herself to target an effect monster the opponent controls and negate its effects till the end of the turn. Pretty good, in my opinion. It's also not once per turn, so if you open multiple, it's not necessarily a dead card. You can use all of them. My problem with Veiler, though, is I just personally don't feel like it does enough. One of the big things that is seeing a lot of success this format is the DPE Scythe Lock, where people are using the Destiny Hero Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer to destroy Artifact Scythe during the opponent's draw or standby phase, to then trigger Scythe on their turn, so it gets special summoned and then locks them out of their extra deck. Unfortunately, Veiler does nothing to interact with that, given that Veiler can only be used during the opponent's turn. However, not every deck is running the DPE Scythe Lock, but it's just something to note. If you are playing Effect Veiler, it's not a card that can prevent that interaction. Like I said, though, I don't think Veiler is necessarily good enough to run because most decks can play through it. However, I do understand that if you're a budget player or you're just getting started and you might not want to invest too much money, Veiler is a good enough hand trap where I would warrant main decking if you had no other option. It can still get the job done here and there, but don't expect it to, you know, completely stop your opponent's plays unless either A, their deck was Glass Cannon, or B, they just opened really, really, really bad. Outside of that, though, Veiler's just okay in my opinion. Moving on, we have DD Crow. Excuse me. DD Crow's not bad. As a quick effect, you discard it to target a card in the opponent's graveyard and banish it. DD Crow is specifically strong against like Striker, being able to hit the engage out of their graveyard. Also against Destiny Hero and Phoenix Enforcer, being able to banish him so he, you know, stops recurring himself over and over. It's also really decent in Eldritch as well, being able to hit Eldritch specifically himself to get him out of the grave, and you know, hopefully you just run them out of Eldritches. But again, it's only really, really impactful against those matchups specifically. And DPE is not even really a matchup because everyone's running DPE more or less. So it's mainly only good in Striker and Eldritch. Outside of that, there really isn't any other deck that you want to DD Crow because either A, they don't care, or B, they can play through it. Also, jumping back to Veiler briefly, Veiler is really good against like Fluunderies or any deck that is like normal summon reliant. Like if they normal summon like Alistair the Invoker, if they're playing Invoked, you can Veiler Alistair and just kind of hope and pray that they don't have the invocation in their hand. But against like Fluunderies, you can Veiler like their normal summon, and it should pretty much end their turn unless they have access to their field spell, which gives them an additional normal summon. But something I forgot to mention. But getting back to Crow, Crow's only really good against Eldritch and Striker. Outside of that, most decks don't really care. So because of that, I don't necessarily know if it's worth main decking unless you're playing like Tri-Brigade Lyralusk or any variant of Lyralusk where you can just search this. Because obviously if you can search this, it makes it that much more viable. But outside of that, I don't think it's worth running necessarily. Then we have Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird is very, very strong. Being able to just prevent your opponent from searching cards from their deck to hand or adding anything from deck to hand for the remainder of the turn is huge. It's really great against rogue decks specifically because most rogue decks need to search their deck a lot. And it's also good against certain meta decks like Fluunderies. It's good against... it doesn't do anything against Eldritch, doesn't do anything really against Striker in my opinion, because the only cards that Striker searches from is either with Engage or with Shizuku's End Phase effect. And at that point, you might as well just use Ash Blossom. But Droll is pretty damn good against like Phantom Knight, for example. It keeps them from like banishing Silent Boots or Cloak from Grave and getting the resources off of that. I think Droll is good enough to be main decked and is a really strong all-around hand trap for the format, in my personal opinion. Against like Shaddoll Invoked, you know, if they have like Nadir Servant and they dump like the Herald and they get to search, you can Droll them, and now it stops them from like adding anything off Alistair, stops them from adding anything off Ecclesia, which I think is cool. But definitely Droll is one of those hand traps that you should probably be main decking, because it's just really great this format, especially against a lot of the meta decks that are fighting for that top spot. However, I am aware that it is pretty expensive though, so if you can't afford it, then, you know, I do, it kind of is what it is. But you may be able to run another hand trap potentially in its place, but we'll get to that shortly. But moving on, we have No Material. This is a hand trap most of you might not know exists because it just doesn't see play. It's not a bad hand trap. The effect on it, it's pretty decent. The problem is the card's drawback. And that drawback is that if your opponent special summons a monster, while you control no cards, and there it is, the only piece of text that keeps this hand trap from being any more relevant, you have to control no cards in order for you to use this, which means that you need to hard open this in your hand if you're going second in order for it to be any sort of relevant. Otherwise, if you draw it, you know, the turn after or any turn beyond that, it's just a brick. But with that being said, what it does is you can discard the card to then target a face-up monster your opponent controls. This turn, that monster cannot be tributed or used as material for a fusion, synchro exceeds, or link summon. That's pretty good. It doesn't negate the card's effects, but it prevents that card from being used as fodder for anything else. Really great in against Invoked, I would say. Like if they normal summon Alistair, you can hit the Alistair, and now they can't fuse with it, they can't link with it, they can't do anything with it. Really, I would say it's not terrible against Floowandereeze either. You can hit their normal summon, and yeah, it doesn't stop their effect, but now they can't use that card as tribute for Empen, which the way Floowandereeze plays, you know, they usually go like Rabina and then go Eaglin, search out Empen tribute Rabina and Eaglin to summon itself. If you no material like the Rabina or the Empen, or the Eaglin, excuse me, they can't use Empen to tribute both those cards. And Empen is a true tribute monster, which means it keeps them off the Empen. But again, how relevant is that? I don't know. Those are just two examples that I brought up. Personally, I don't think no material should be played. It's the effect it has is great, but the drawback is it just sucks. Like the fact that you have to control no cards is really what kills this thing. And because of that alone, I don't think the card's worth running under any capacity. Moving on, though, we have Psyframe Gear Gamma and his wonderful companion, Psyframe Driver. For those of you that don't know, Psyframe Gear Gamma can, as a quick effect, negate the activation of an opponent's monster effect and destroy that card. So not only do you negate that effect, you also remove that body from the field so they cannot use it as material for anything else, which is huge. The downside is that you have to be able to special summon a Psyframe Driver from your hand, deck, or graveyard in order for Gamma to resolve completely. So you basically play a brick in your deck to facilitate your hand trap. When you draw the driver, it sucks a lot. But I think the payoff that Gamma offers is worth playing the brick, because not only negating the card that they were trying to activate, but also destroying it is too big to be ignored. Again, Gamma does have, aside from needing to play the brick, which is driver, the other drawback Gamma has is that you can't activate Gamma unless you control no monsters. Not as bad as like no material that you have to control no cards. At least with Gamma, you can still have like spells and traps on your field. You just can't control monsters. So it still kind of sucks, but there's a workaround. I know that you can summon like Psyframe Lambda, which is the Link 2, and Lambda can play around that restriction, but not every deck plays Lambda, and not every deck has the space for Lambda in the extra deck. But Gamma, I still think, is a great hand trap. Also, something to note is that it is a Psychic and a Tuner, so you can special summon Gamma off of E-Telly to function as an additional extender, or into Link plays or Synchro plays, which I think is cool. But Gamma isn't something that should be overlooked. Also, if you activate Gamma on your turn for some reason, like if you activate a card that searches and they Ash, you can Gamma in response. If you do that, you special Gamma, special Driver. It puts 2 free bodies on your board to either Synchro with or Link Climb with. It's just free real estate at that point. And then if you activate Gamma in the opponent's turn and they're on the offensive, it can at least put 2 bodies on your board that they have to hit through. So it can protect you from taking, a possible lethal hit directly and whatnot. So just food for thought, but I think Gamma's great and should be considered to be ran in most decks. Not every deck, but most decks should consider Gamma as an option. It pretty much checks every relevant matchup, including Eldritch. It's one of the few hand traps that can actually interact with Eldritch, which I think is cool. So for that reason, I think Gamma should still be considered. Then you have Ash Blossom, again, another tried and true, old reliable. Ash just prevents cards from being added from the deck to the hand, or being special summoned from the deck. Also, if the opponent tries to send a card from the deck to the graveyard, Ash can stop that as well. I think Ash isn't as impactful as it used to be, simply because most modern decks can play around it. Or at least any competent deck. To me, it seems like Ash doesn't have as much of an impact as it used to, because most decks now just have so much gas behind them where they can just play through almost anything, it feels like. And Ash, in my opinion, just doesn't seem to have that impact it used to have. However, that doesn't mean that it's a bad hand trap. I still think it has a place in the meta. And as a generic hand trap, it stops almost anything. There isn't a single deck that you can't Ash something in, which I think is nice. Also, too, how you use Ash, I think, is a lot of where its viability can change. Because if you're using Ash to stop, like, searching effects or, like, a draw effect, it might not be as impactful as ashing something that, like, would attempt a special from deck. Like, if they try to E-Telly, you ash that. Or if they summon Christian Halka-Fibrax and you ash the summon of the tuner. Those, I feel, are more impactful Ash Blossoms than trying to Ash Blossom, like, a Rhoda effect of some sort. But that's just my opinion, though. I still think Ash could be considered. It pretty much checks almost every deck in the format. I just don't think that most decks care about it as much anymore, because a lot of decks can still play through it. But moving on, we have Ghost Bell, which is basically the opposite version of what Ash does. As if Ash stops everything from deck, or deck related, then Bell stops everything graveyard related. She stops cards from being summoned from grave, stops cards from being added from the graveyard to the hand, deck, or extra deck. Also prevents cards from being banished from the graveyard as well. Bell checks a lot of your graveyard matchups, so I think Bell's really strong against Eldritch. Bell's also strong against Phantom Knight. Trying to think what else Bell's good against. DPE, obviously, it's really strong with against. So Bell is another pretty good hand trap to be considered to be main decked. It doesn't check all the decks in the format, but I think it's pretty well rounded. I would argue that Bell's, in my opinion, better than Ash this format, just because I feel like there's a lot more graveyard reliance than there is main deck reliance. But that's just, again, a personal opinion. But Bell is always still a decent hand trap. Now you have in my opinion, a hand trap that blew up in popularity, seemed like overnight, is Ghost Ogre. A big reason why you might be seeing Ghost Ogre more now is because it's a psychic and a tuner, and E-Telly's now at 3, which means that now people can summon Ogre as an additional extender to play through Disruption or to combo off. Pretty cool. Also, it's one of the few hand traps that can actually use its hand trap effect from the field, which is pretty unique to Ogre specifically, because none of the other hand traps can do that. But pretty much when a monster effect's activated, or when a spell or trap that's already face up on the field activates its effect, you can discard the Ogre to destroy that card. Doesn't negate the card, but it gets it off the field. It's pretty good against the continuous spell for the adventure package. I forget the name, but it's the one that adds the Wandering Griffin Rider to hand. You can Ogre that activation of the effect and prevent them from getting the search. You can also, Ogre's pretty good against Omni Negates as well, where like if you activate something and they chain like a Borlow Savage or Appaloosa, you can chain Ogre in response, and it just destroys the card, which is pretty awesome. So I think Ogre should definitely be main deck this format. It checks a lot of the relevant strategies that are in meta contention at the moment. And I also think it's not too expensive, at least the last time I checked. I could be wrong, but I would say it's definitely cheaper than Bell or Ash's, I think. But I think Ogre's definitely pretty strong. And also, as a side note, I'm also choosing to main deck triple Ogre in my upcoming FA Metaphos profile that I'll be showcasing. So stay tuned for that. But then we have Ghost Mourner Moonlit Chill. She's a little situational in my opinion. Basically, if the opponent special summons a monster, you can target it and negate its effects. And then if that monster leaves the field, you can burn them for the attack that turn. In my opinion, I think it's just a worse version of Effect Veiler. Because at least Veiler can hit normal summons, where this can only hit special summons specifically. So like this card against Fluunderies isn't going to do jack shit, because they don't even special. And like I said, it negates the card's effects, and then like burns them for a little bit, which I guess is cool, depending on what kind of deck you're playing. But like, I think in the grand scheme, it really doesn't matter. And if they can play through a Veiler, they can probably play through this. And this, like I said, this is only even more situational because it only stops special summons specifically. So I don't know. I don't think... I would say if you're going to run a card like this, you're better off just playing Veilers. The only benefit that this has over Veiler is that you can actually use this on your turn as well, whereas Veiler can only be used during the opponent's turn. But either way, moving on, we have Ghost Sister and Spooky Dogwood. Don't play this card. It's not good, this format, at all. It's kind of terrible, actually. Yeah, you can discard it, and you get to gain the attack of all monsters that your opponent special summons that turn. It makes your life points get really, really big, which is cool, but in the grand scheme, probably doesn't matter. Realistically, the only deck that should be playing this, if they even want to, is like a Romage, because they're the only Yu-Gi-Oh deck that cares about life point gaining. But outside of that, you probably shouldn't be playing Ghost Sister. It doesn't do anything this format, so don't run it. Next up, we got Skullmeister, another hand trap. Pretty cool. When a card or effect's activated in the opponent's graveyard, quick effect, you can send this card from your hand to grave to negate that effect. Skullmeister's also not once per turn. It's kind of like Effect Veiler, except it deals with stuff in the graveyard, which is pretty cool. Good against Eldritch, good against DPE, good against Phantom Knight. Trying to think what else. I think, yeah, maybe. There might be another deck I'm forgetting, but it's good against those strategies for sure. Forgive me if I'm forgetting anything off the top of my head, but I think it's a decent card you should consider running, or at least side decking maybe, because it's good against those matchups specifically, and those matchups are probably going to be the most relevant. But yeah, Skullmeister's, something that shouldn't be taken for granted. But now, we're moving on to Artifact Lancia. Lancia's a house. This is a blowout, just like Droll. You can tribute this as a quick effect from your hand or field, and for the remainder of the turn, the opponent cannot banish cards. Or neither player can banish cards, excuse me. That's strong. A lot of decks nowadays are banishing stuff for cost or for effects to search things or activate stuff. This just turns off like an Eldritch player's board. They can't banish none of their spells and traps to set other spells and traps from their deck. Against Phantom Knights, they can't banish their boots or cloak to search. Just so much. Even against in a DPE matchup, they can't banish Celestial to draw 2 cards. There's so many decks that Lancia just stops inherently. Against Virtual World, there's a few things that it prevents them from doing as well. Lancia is a strong hand trap. I would almost recommend main decking this, or at least siding it for sure, because it is really good this format, just like Ogre. Moving on, we have Contact C. Contact C, I don't think is very good this format. Basically, when your opponent normal or special summons a monster, you can special summon the Contact C from your hand to their field in defense, and the controller of the Contact C cannot fusion, synchro, exceed, or link summon unless they use this card as material. Against Sword Soul, this card's ass. Don't give this to them, because they can just summon a level 4 token tuner, and then use the token tuner in this to make Baron de Fleur, and you gave them a free negate. High five. So do not play this against Sword Soul. It's stupid. Against Eldritch, they don't really give a shit. They just don't care, because they don't even extra deck summon all that much realistically. Against Virtual World, this also isn't that great either, because it's level 6. And Virtual World plays a lot of level 3 tuners, so they can just take those tuners in this to make Shen Shen. Again, you're just helping them out, so don't do this against Virtual World. I'm trying to think what deck it is good against. Honestly, right now, I don't think it's good against anything. Maybe Invoked at all. Yeah, I don't think anybody's playing Shekanaga in the extra deck, and that's the only Earth Shadal that they can make. So if they're not running that, they're gonna have a hard time getting rid of this, I guess. But I don't think it's that good to run this format. It's a fun card, but just not right now. Next up is Dimension Shifter. This card is a double-edged sword. It's basically a macrocosmos on legs. You discard it while you have no cards in your graveyard, and to the end of the next turn, any card sent to the graveyard is banished instead. Very, very powerful hand trap, cannot be understated. However, not every deck can run this because not every deck can afford to have their cards banished. With that being said, though, if your deck can afford to have cards banished, then I would most definitely consider playing it. Under no circumstance would I ever cut this out of something like Metaphys or Mutant. I know Fluunderies can main deck this card pretty easily as well. But it's definitely a turn ender. It stops Eldritch, it stops almost every meta-relevant deck in the format. So if your deck has the capacity to play this, definitely run it. This card is gas. Moving on, though, getting into the last bit, we have one Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. Now, this card doesn't stop your opponent from doing anything. All this card does is if they link summon, you can special the Phantasme and then draw cards equal to the link rating of the monster they summoned, or something along those lines. It kind of just helps you, like, fix your hand a bit, or it can help you dig for more hand traps, like post-side, which I think is cool. It just, you know, it's a 2400 body, level 7, dark. You know, it doesn't do anything to stop your opponent from playing. It's just a way for you to dig deeper into your deck for either a combo piece, a starter, or maybe an additional hand trap. But outside of that, it really doesn't serve any other function. Also, it can only be special summoned when your opponent link summons specifically, which not every deck is gonna do. So this can be situational. I wouldn't necessarily main deck it, but I could see some argument for siding it depending on the deck you're running, but overall, I don't think it's a hand trap you should be playing this format anyway. Moving on, we have Nibiru the Primal Being. Good old Rocky Boy. If your opponent special summons 5 or more times, smack him with the rock. Make him pay for it, I guess. Nib, you know, I don't know how to feel about this. Nib is great. The problem that I have with Nib is that most competent decks can set up a monster negate before their 5th summon, which is a problem because that means that they're not going to get nibbed, and all you did was beta negate. I mean, if that's all you wanted to do, then you're probably just better off playing like Chalice or something else, I guess. I don't know. You know, if the opponent doesn't respect the nib and they get punished by it, that's on them. But you can't expect your opponent to be that naive. Most, like I said, competent decks are going to be able to set up some type of negate or disruption before their 5th summon, if they're smart. Especially now with the adventure package being in the TCG, it's even easier than ever before to set up a negate before the 5th summon. So I think Nib is really strong. I just feel that most decks that would die to Nib are playing outs to it already. So it doesn't seem as impactful. And finally, to round things off, we have the one, the only Infinite Impermanence. The only hand trap that's actually a trap. Who would have thought? Infinite Impermanence, in my opinion, is hands down one of the strongest hand traps ever printed, ever. This card I don't think will ever fall out of favor. It is nuts. Being able to target any face-up monster the opponent controls and negate its effects to the end of the turn. And then also having the added benefit of if this card is set on the field and you activate it like you would any normal trap, you also get to blank the entire column for spells and trap activations, which is also just an added benefit. But in Perm, it's not once per turn, so if you draw multiple, they're all live. It's just such a strong hand trap. Like, honestly, in my opinion, out of every hand trap that I just showed you guys in this video, I think, in my opinion, Imperm takes the cake at probably being the strongest of the bunch. It's very, very good against almost all decks you'll face. The only deck it doesn't do much is against Eldritch, but outside of that, it's, I would say, pretty relevant against most of your other matchups. But obviously, I know that it is also fetches a decent price tag as well. But with that being said, hopefully you guys liked this hand trap discussion video, and hopefully some of the hand traps I showcased and, you know, talked a little bit about gave you some insight on what you can and can't run this format, or what's good and what's not good. But again, thank you all so much for the 200 subs. Stay tuned for exciting things on the channel. And that's it, guys. Have a good night.